Thank you very much. As Annie mentioned, peregrines are new for IWS, the Institute for Wildlife Studies, the group that I work for. So I'll talk about the history of the peregrines on the islands and the work that's been done to bring them back, and specifically what we've found in the last 2 years. Now, peregrines are about a crow-sized raptor found on every continent except for Antarctica. As with many raptors, the female is about 25% larger than the male. In North America, we have 3 different distinct subspecies of peregrine falcons. We have the Arctic peregrine falcons. We have the Peale's peregrine falcon. And what I'll be talking about most tonight is the American peregrine falcon. So the Arctic birds are only found along the northern portions of Alaska over to Greenland. The Peale's are just found basically along the Pacific coast from the Aleutians down through British Columbia. And then the American peregrine falcons are found everywhere else. There is some interbreeding in an area between the American and the Arctic peregrine falcons. Now, peregrine means wanderer, and these birds can fly very long distances. In particular, the Arctic birds will actually fly down to South America in the winter and may cover more than 15,000 miles in a year in their northern and southern migrations. Probably what most of you know best about the peregrines is their speed. They have been clocked at between 183 and 240 miles per hour in a dive. This is just a clip from a National Geographic where they actually dropped a lure out of an airplane and then tracked the bird down. But you can see they go into a vertical dive after their prey. They'll either hit it and either kill it or knock it out, or they'll actually grab it in flight. So that was just a lure. That wasn't a real bird that it was grabbing, but it's next to impossible to actually follow a peregrine falcon when it's in its dive. Now, across the United States and most of the world, actually, the peregrines started declining in the 50s and 60s. They were extirpated from the U.S. east of the Mississippi by the 1970s, and there were just a few hundred pairs left nesting in the western United States. Now, before the 1940s, California had at least 100 nests producing young each year. Most of these sites are actually along the coast or within 10 miles of the ocean. Now, the peregrines in Southern California on the Channel Islands, they inhabited at least 7 of the 8 islands, and it's thought that they probably occurred on San Nicolas Island out here. But as some of you probably know, there's 8 islands out there, grouped into the northern islands and the southern islands. The 4 northern islands, as well as Santa Barbara Island, are part of the national park. The other islands are owned by the Navy and the Santa Catalina Island Conservancy. Peregrines were found on all of the islands, although they're not known to have bred on San Nicolas Island, but birds were seen there. And they were here until probably about the mid-1950s, at which time they'd been extirpated from Southern California. Now, what caused this? It's the same that caused the problems with the eagles that we've been restoring, and it was DDT. Now, DDT was raved for being good for your fruit, your steers, your house, but it was definitely not good for raptors. What it does is it affects the way that the eggshells are laid down by the female, and the eggs would break before the chicks could hatch. So there was essentially no reproduction. In the mid-'80s, it was discovered that the Montrose Chemical Corporation in Torrance, California, had been discharging DDT-laden sewage through the White Points outfall. And it's estimated that over 1,800 metric tons of DDT were discharged. Another 500 or so tons were taken out in 55-gallon barrels and dumped at deeper water sites. So it was a really contaminated area. There's about a 17 square mile area off of the Palos Verdes Peninsula there that's considered a Superfund site. DDT was banned for use in the US in 1972, and by the late 70s, other birds that had been impacted, such as the brown pelicans, were again reproducing. We started reintroducing bald eagles at that time, and the Santa Cruz Predatory Bird Research Group started reintroducing peregrine falcons to the islands. They released 37 falcons between 1983 and 1988. Most were either on Catalina Island or San Miguel Island, as you can see here. In 1986, we had the first known pair out on San Miguel Island. They laid their first eggs in 1987, but they failed to hatch. The first known chicks were in 1989 on Anacapa Island, and then in 1990 on Santa Cruz Island. There were a few more surveys done regularly in the early 90s, primarily in the lawsuit against Montrose Chemical for the dumping of the DDT. So at any one time, they found 8 to 9 active occupied territories, all on the northern Channel Islands. However, after about 1994, there really was not much work done on peregrine falcons on the islands. That changed in the 2000s because in 2001, there was a lawsuit settlement against Montrose for approximately $140 million in restitution. The Montrose Settlements Restoration Program was formed at that time, and they had approximately $30 million allocated for restoration work on the Channel Islands. So at that time, they planned to do peregrine falcon surveys about every 5 years, starting in 2007. So in 2007, the Santa Cruz Predatory Bird Research Group, the ones that had initially released birds out on the islands, did a survey of all 8 islands. At that time, they found 27 occupied territories with most of those up on the northern Channel Islands. What I mean by occupied is that there's either 2 adults or an adult and a subadult, which is a 1-year-old, present in the territory, or there's evidence of reproduction. So a bird is incubating eggs or there's chicks present. For the 2013 survey, it was supposed to be in 2012, but the survey was put off for a year. IWS was awarded the contract. As I mentioned, we had not been in the peregrine falcon business before that. So I hired Joe Barnes, who's seen here. He'd done his master's on peregrines in Nevada and had developed a unique technique for finding birds in that area. And I thought that technique would work well on the Channel Islands. Basically, when you're surveying for peregrines, the standard protocol under the Fish and Wildlife Service is you go to a suspected territory and spend 4 hours watching for birds. If you don't see anything, you're supposed to go back a month later for another 4 hours, and if you don't see anything, you go back a month later. And that's the only way that they determine that there's actually not birds present at that time. The problem with peregrines is they blend in. You probably can't even see that bird sitting there, right there in the middle of the circle. Bald eagles are really nice. They've got a white head. They just stick out. But you could stare at this cliff all day, and if the bird doesn't move, you can't see anything. Here's another example. These birds are actually perched out prominently inside the square. Still don't see them. They're sitting on rocks. There's shadows and everything, but still, a gray and black and white bird on a gray and black and white cliff makes it a bit difficult. So what we did for our surveys was we incorporated a 10-minute call broadcast. And what this is we'd go to a known historic territory. We'd look and listen for about 3 minutes. We would then play, I can see it somewhere. I can't even see it. There it is. Oh, back one. Can anybody see the? Oh, there it is. It's blending in just like a peregrine, right? I got it. I don't know if we have audio, though. Well, unfortunately, I don't think it's playing. Yeah, so basically, it's just a recording of the of a adult female. Oh, there it is. We'll play that for 30 seconds. Oh, I got it. Wow. So that was the call. I don't know if we have audio, though. So play that for 30 seconds. Well, unfortunately, I don't think it's playing. Yeah, so basically, it's just... We look around for another minute. We play the call for another 30 seconds, and then we listen and watch for another 5 minutes. If we don't see anything then, we'll do the 4 hours. So play that for 30 seconds. I think we have ghosts. So if we don't find anything in that 10 minutes, then we'll go and do the 4 hours of passive monitoring. So generally, when we play the call, we get a response from the birds, which is either a vocalization, or they'll fly out from the cliffs and fly around, or they'll fly around and vocalize. This technique was very good in finding the birds. We had 58% response rate on our first visit to territories. So essentially, in usually less than 5 minutes, we could determine that a pair was present in a territory instead of sitting there for 4 hours, possibly 3 different times. So it was very effective in finding the birds. And last year, we were actually out there doing some calls in January and early February, which would actually be before the breeding season. So most of the ones that didn't respond, we would get a response when we went back a second time in later February. So we did surveys from land. We would go to known historic territories and do our surveys. But to find new territories, we basically covered the coasts of all the islands, and we would do just that 10-minute survey. Then we move 500 to 1,000 meters along and do the call again. So we had very good coverage of the islands. We also did a lot of work, especially on Santa Cruz and Anacapa from boats, because you just can't see the cliffs or access the cliffs from land on a lot of these islands. Once we did find a pair, we would observe them every 10 to 14 days, looking for courtship behavior, copulations, and hopefully an indication of where they were going to nest. And, for the most part, we were able to locate their nest site. Sometimes you can't see it from land or from water, but you have an idea that they're within this 20 meters of cliff, and you can sort of get an idea of what stage of the reproduction they're in from their behavior. For the most part, the Iries are on decent-sized cliffs. This is probably a 500-600 foot cliff on Santa Cruz Island. The Irie, they're generally within the top half to third of the cliff, and so this one is almost exactly 150 feet down. Those are climbers at the top, just for perspective. Other ones we found in areas which generally wouldn't be considered good peregrine habitat, such as these maybe 10 to 20 meter high coastal, mostly dirt bluffs. So we found several in this kind of territory, especially on Santa Rosa Island, and the nest is right below the climber there. So in the 2013 surveys, we located 45 occupied territories. This was a over 60% increase from the previous 2007 survey. Most of the nests were on the northern islands, 38 of them, shown there in the red. We did have 7 down on the southern Channel Islands. There's actually 3 out here on Santa Barbara, so the island's actually under red. And that's the smallest island at just about a square mile. So there's a high density of peregrines on that island. Some of the high points of that season were finding this nest on Catalina and these 2 on San Nicolas Island. This is the nest on Santa Catalina Island, and these were the first known chicks produced on the islands since they disappeared over 60 years ago. Yeah, they were very cute. There's 3 of them stuffed in this little hole. We did band them, but unfortunately they slowly disappeared after that. We've had drought for the last few years, and I think they're having a hard time getting food for their chicks. The northern islands seem to have a lot of food availability. Down on the southern islands, we just don't have the seabird abundance as we do up here. And another high point was finding those 2 nests on Nicholas. Those were the first known nests ever on that island. We found 2 different nests. One produced 2 chicks. This is probably the first chick ever to be known on the island. And the other one produced 3. And they all fledged, yes. That one is probably about 23, 25 days. I'll tell you a little bit more about the banding process. This year, we found a few more, shown here in yellow. So we found an additional nest out on Anacapa Island, additional one at the east end of Santa Cruz Island. We had one disappear, or we couldn't confirm that it was active at least, or occupied out on San Miguel Island. And then on the southern islands, we found 2 additional nests. We found one at the southern end of Catalina and one on the midwestern coast of San Clemente Island. So once we find a nest, we'll return to it about every 10 to 14 days to determine their nesting chronology. Here we have just a quick summary of last year's nesting data. We have eggs laid anywhere from late February up on Santa Barbara Island, which is SBI, all the way into mid-May, which was out. We had one nest was on San Miguel Island. It was most likely a second clutch. I think they failed with their first set of eggs and relayed later on. And then we get chicks produced in green from early April through mid-June, but the peaks are in April for egg laying. Chicks take their first flight when they're about 42 days old. So we go into the nests when they're usually about 21 to 28 days of age. At that age, you can determine which sex they are by their size. If you go much beyond that, they have a tendency to run and jump out of the nest cliff. And as you can see here, most of them are above water, so that's not a viable option. So this is a nest on Santa Cruz Island. We go in and band, and it's easier said than done. This particular one, we have to put our boat in at Prisoners Harbor, go down the coast, hit a beach, hike up and over a pretty good mountain, climb back down, and then get low enough that we can actually put in ropes to access this nest. So here we get a little closer view. Closer view, you can actually start to make out that there's a person right here crawling into. This one is just a pothole. So this is one of the ones that we have to determine what's going on mostly by behavior. because we're on another ridge, maybe half a mile away with a spotting scope. Every once in a while, you might be able to see some movement in the pothole, but otherwise, you're just watching the adults coming and going. So here he is a little bit closer. It's actually got two entrances. So there's a pothole that he's just crawled in. There's one up above. So the birds will come and go from either one of those. So there's a decent sized cave back in there. Other ones are a little easier to access. You might want some Dramamine for this video. This is that one that I showed you on the bluff. It's about maybe a 30-meter bluff. And we go out, we rig up our ropes. I usually let my professional climber do the really scary ones, but this one I do. Or at least he sets up the ropes. So there is some audio on this one too. I guess we're not going to get any audio. So the whole time that we're climbing into the nest, we have the adults circling around just screaming at us. This one is a contour. It's the same sort of idea, yeah. I might just start playing these on my computer so you get some sound to them too.
Have they actually attacked you and make contact?
They will, yes. They haven't hit me, but Jim Campbell Spickler, who climbs, he's a professional climber. He gets hit. It would be our hope to tag all the birds, but it's just not feasible. Like Annie was saying, I might have birds at 3 to 4 different islands that are the right age to band, so I have to coordinate the transportation to and from every island. And I think one day last year we were on 3 different islands in a day: Santa Rosa, Santa Cruz, and Santa Barbara, banding on all 3 islands in a single day.
I was on a boat, I think it was last year, 4 chicks on Untitled Chapter.
Yes, we had 4. You'll actually see them soon. Oh no, I'll start playing the videos through my laptop too. So we put the birds into a bag and take them back up to the top where they can be safely processed without worrying about them jumping off the ledge. So after a little switching of the gear, climb back up the rope to the top. And the equipment has really come a long way in the last 20 years for going both up and down. I don't know if any of you have rappelled before, but it used to be a figure 8, and you had to hold on to it the whole time to keep yourself from sliding. Now we use what's called a gree-gree, and you just basically cock a handle, and if you let go of that, you stop. So there's no fear of getting knocked out and falling off a cliff. We put a silver leg band, which is the federal leg band, on the birds, and then a black band with silver letters. So essentially in Southern California, they want us to use that black band with silver letters. So it's not like the eagles where we put orange tags on their wings for Catalina and blue tags for up here. Yeah, I don't think Workman's Comp even knows about any of this work. Let's see. All right, so back up, and then we're ready to process. So that was an easier one. Here's one where we can actually walk down. So this nest is on Anacapa Island. This is the one that had 4 chicks, which you're actually going to see in a minute. That was like 2 weeks ago. So this one, there's no ground predators out there, so we can just they can just put their nests wherever they want that's protected from maybe gulls and red tails. They can have up to about 4. Yes. So let me keep up.
Did all 4 of those catch?
They did. Let's see if I can pause. No, we went. Whoop, that's a. I don't know where my banding went in. We walked down. Oh, well, I don't know where it went. Anywho, so when we're banding, we're putting leg bands on them, we're weighing them, we're drawing blood for contaminants analysis. We also collect prey remains from the nest so that we know what they're feeding on. And we'll collect any addled eggs that might be left in the nest so we can do contaminants analysis on those.
What do they feed on mostly?
Mostly small seabirds and shorebirds. A lot of murrelets and red phalaropes are high up on there. Okay, let's see if we can skip ahead to this one. Okay, so here they are after banding. What we do is we put the black band on the left leg of females and on the right leg of males. So that way we can tell who's who in the future.
What are the parents doing while they're squawking?
The parents, well, this usually takes around an hour with the climbing and the banding. So initially when you're going into the nest, the parents are soaring around and squawking. Then they'll just go and perch on a point somewhere and watch you. Then when you put the chicks back in the nest, they'll come flying around and squawking again, trying to scare you off. Excuse me. So, we would like to band as many as we can. We did about 50 last year and 35 chicks this year. And the purpose is to give us some information just on the basic biology of these birds, such as survival rates, movements to and from the islands. And we're actually starting to get some good information on movements of the young birds. This is a bird that was banded on Santa Cruz Island last year and was seen up at Oceano Dunes up in Central California in December. And somebody knew that we had banded birds and asked if this was one of them, and it was. And then, just emailed me a picture of it. This is one that we banded on Santa Cruz this year, and in August it was at the Sepulveda Dam recreation area down in Los Angeles. So I think he saw this bird a couple days in a row down there, just sitting on the dam watching birds down below. We've also had one of our Santa Barbara birds from last year was on San Clemente Island. I think it was actually hit by a plane out there. And one of those 4 Anacapa birds from last year was actually trapped down at Camp Pendleton this year. We also do work down there to help protect the terns from predation, and this bird was one of the predators. So it got trapped, got a GPS unit put on it, and got a free migration up to Northern California. So as I mentioned, we also take the eggs that don't hatch. It's usually maybe only 3 or 4 a year that are still present when we go in. And from these, we can look at the DDE content, which is, it's actually the thing that makes the eggs thinner. It's not DDT, it's one of its metabolites, which is DDE. And look at percent eggshell thinning. So, pardon? I'll show it right here. So back in the early 90s when Granger Hunt was collecting eggs out of the islands, he had almost 20 parts per million wet weight of DDE in the eggs. Essentially, they found that about 17% or higher is typical of a declining population. And then we had average eggshell thinning also close to 20%. In the 2007 work, the mean DDE had dropped quite significantly. although the eggshell thinning hadn't dropped quite as much. We haven't got the DDE data back yet. It was actually only recently sent into the labs. So I expect it'll be a little bit lower, but you can see that our eggshell thinning last year was quite a bit lower than in 2007. So, it looks like things are doing pretty well, but we need to look at basically the productivity to see if this population can maintain itself. So in 2007, they had 24 nests that they knew the outcome of the breeding. 16 of those actually hatched chicks, so they had a almost 67% nest success, which means that they produced at least one chick. And productivity was about almost 1.5 chicks per occupied territory. They produced a total of 35 chicks that year. Last year, we had 41 territories where we knew the outcome of the breeding, and 22 of those, or almost 54%, produced at least one chick. We had 55 total chicks produced for 1.3 chicks per occupied territory. And this year, we jumped up quite a bit, almost 73% success, and almost 1.6 chicks per nest, with a total of 59 chicks that fledged. So overall, the last 3 survey years were about 64% nest success, 1.46 chicks per occupied territory. The general guidelines are 68% and 1.5 chicks per occupied territory will be able to maintain the population. So we're close enough to that I think we can maintain this population without any new threats added in. It's hard to say. It could be the drought. It could just have been, just random. Some years they have low, some years they have high. It's really hard to say. There was nothing done between 2007 and 2013, so we don't know if that's a high or a low point. So what we're hoping to do is continue this on for the next few years at least to have annual data on their productivity. I think right now we're sort of good through 2017 for doing this work.
How long does the Peregrine Falcon live?
Probably 15 to 20 years. That's another thing that we really don't know because they haven't been banded regularly. So another reason we're banding the chicks is to find out survival, how far into the future these birds are found migrating.
It's not an increased number of birds being produced, all those aspects.
Right. Hopefully the ones, sorry about this. Hopefully, they will, a lot of them will hopefully survive and come back to the islands to breed, but they will move to mainland locations as well. So overall, we've got an increasing population out on the islands. The points shown in yellow are years where there are actually systematic surveys being done. Red ones are just opportunistic ones out there. But we're actually rather quickly approaching about 50 known occupied territories on the islands. Historically, it was only estimated that there were 15 to 30. But as you saw, they're difficult to find, so it was likely an underestimation. Sorry. So overall, right now, we've probably got 80 or more adult peregrines up on the northern islands, another 24, 25 down on the southern islands. Estimated that there's, about 100 adult peregrines currently on the islands. I think in the next few years, the population will continue to grow. This year, it grew almost 7% over last year, or at least we found 7% more. Between 2007 and 2013, it was almost a 9% increase annually. So we do still have more areas up on the northern islands, especially for territorial birds to hold. The habitat on the southern islands really isn't that good. There aren't a lot of nice cliffs for the most part. And as I mentioned earlier, there's not a whole bunch of prey. So I think the northern islands will always be their stronghold on the Channel Islands. So as I mentioned, the current population exceeds the predicted historic population levels. Productivity and nest success appear to be sufficient to maintain and or increase the population, and there's still suitable habitat available out there for additional territories. Over the next few years, we want to continue with the banding to look at basic population parameters such as the survival rates, immigration to the islands, mate turnover at territories. We don't know if it's the same birds from year to year. So hopefully when we get some of these banded birds returning to breed, we can figure out who the actual individuals are at the nests. And hopefully continue to collect addled eggs to look at the DDE and see if it's still negatively impacting reproduction, although at this point it doesn't seem to be doing too much. Before I conclude, I have a long list of agencies and individuals I'd like to thank. The Montrose Settlements Restoration Program has been funding this work. The National Park Service, the Nature Conservancy, and the Navy, and Santa Catalina Island Conservancy have given us access to all of the islands. We also stay up at the Navy site on Santa Cruz Island, which they've been providing for free for the last 12 years, actually, for us out there. I also like to thank Nancy Wells, who is our volunteer membership coordinator, and she is the one that's taken a lot of these photos. She watches a nest down in, actually it's in Laguna Beach, but she goes out there daily during the breeding season and gets some extraordinary photos, many of which were in here, and I'll show a few more as I take any questions. Thank you.
What is the prey including fish of the falcon? What are the predators of the falcon? Island fox.
The island fox, if they can access the eyries, they will take eggs or chicks, but we don't know of any confirmed predation by the foxes. The falcon's predators for eggs and young chicks would probably be ravens. Red-tailed hawks will probably take both young birds, recently fledged birds, but I don't think they'd be able to capture a fully flighted peregrine.
I'm going to interrupt for just a minute. I've got the mic. So if you have a question, if you would raise your hand and wait till I get to you, then we can all hear what your question is. Okay? So just raise your hand. I see one back here.
With the Montrose pollution, DDT, and a Superfund, I read a long time ago that they were thinking about capping it off with clay. Is that still in the process?
They did some sample capping and from what I know, it pretty much was a failure because the sediment coming down on top of would just basically plume out what was already on the floor. So they need to find a way to do really fine silt. I thought maybe if they just sort of made a pile of it up current and just let the natural currents carry stuff over it. But Annie Little would actually maybe have more information on what their future plans are for that. Got a couple over here.
Now, falconry has been around for millennium, and the peregrine has been the king's bird. Do we have any data from back then about how long they live and that kind of information?
I'm sure the captive birds survive a lot longer than wild birds, but I actually don't know what the longest record of survival is for a peregrine.
Do they usually return back to where they were originally hatched to reproduce, or do they just go off wherever?
I think they return to the general vicinity. Like with bald eagles, it's 1 to 200 miles from where they fledged. It's probably similar with the peregrine falcons. But that's the whole idea of the original hacking releases, is that they view that as home, and that they'll come back and breed in that area. So they do have a tendency to come back to the same general area.
The bird that got their free migration in Northern California, earlier on in your report here, you said that they would migrate as far as South America. Is that really enough distance to take care of the business?
The ones that do the main migration down to South America come from the Arctic population. The ones down here, they don't tend to really migrate. That was more of a joke. But they've been moving birds from Camp Pendleton, and sometimes the bird will actually beat them back to Camp Pendleton after they release it. So it's likely that that bird will show up back down here again, but we'll know what route it took at least. Yeah.
Peter, you've touched on edges of this question, but how much is really known about why they settle in any given area?
Why the peregrines decide to use this particular area? It's going to be habitat availability and prey. So they prefer to have a nice cliff, at least 100 feet tall, with potholes or crevices or ledges on it, where they with loose material. They don't build a stick nest. They make what's called a scrape. So they'll just sort of scrape an inch or two deep hole in the dirt and lay their eggs in that. That's another reason why they're so hard to find. You know, most other species, you go out and you look for a stick nest. These, you can be staring right at their nests, and it's, you know, if the bird's head is behind a rock or something, you know, you'll just look right past it. So, and they move around generally in the same cliff year to year, but they don't necessarily use the same ledge. So one year they'll be here, another year they might be 200 meters further to the west. They may reuse, you know, every couple of years, but makes them very hard to find.
Yeah, Peter, in relation to that is, with the other predators, you find with the bald eagle or the hawks that they'll move around, or that they will harass each other, or is there any indication that they seek out territory away from the other predators?
We've seen the peregrines dive bombing eagles that come through their territories. They are going to probably try to at least have their nest sites a good distance from each other, just so that they don't have the stress of having. I guess the eagles probably don't care much about the peregrines, but the peregrines care about the eagles and the red tails. So, you know, they'll find a location that doesn't have any nesting close by, because it would be stressful to have to chase off these birds every time they go out to feed.
What is the primary prey of the falcons?
Birds are their primary prey, and from last year's data, I think red phalaropes was the number one. They'll take any small to medium-sized shorebird, seabird, and they'll go up to gull size if they have the chance.
What does addled mean, and what does fledged mean?
Addled is an egg that is dead. So it's, like I said, we only find maybe 3 to 4 a year, because by the time we get there, 3 to 4 weeks after they should have hatched, they probably burst from gases. So we're very careful with the ones that we do find. Wrap them in foil, and then put them in a closed jar as quickly as we can, so that they don't burst on us. And fledged is flighted. So when they've taken their first flight from the nest.
Peter, you mentioned that we've got more birds on the islands now than we've ever known to historically have. And you also indicated that we might see continued growth out there. Do you have any idea what the carrying capacity of the islands would be?
The carrying capacity, that's a good one. No idea, but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe, I don't know, 75 pairs. Like I said, the southern islands really don't have the habitat. I don't think we're ever going to have too many down on the southern islands. Northern islands, we still have a lot of coastal cliffs that don't have known pairs. So I think we can probably add maybe a couple more on Anacapa, maybe another 10 or so on Santa Cruz, another half dozen or so on Santa Rosa. I think Santa Barbara's probably at capacity with 3. They're pretty much stepping on each other. The first year, we thought there was actually 2 pairs within 500 feet of each other. So, and neither of the nests were really visible at first. So we were just sort of assuming it was the same pair flying by both ways, but it turned out to be.
So they're not territorial?
They are territorial, but I think what they like is to have a land mass between them and the next territory. So, you know, if you have a large cove with points, you could have somebody else nesting around the point on each side. But I think it's basically, if you want to be out of view of your neighbor, just because it takes a lot of energy to fly, and if you're out there having to defend your territory all the time, that can use a lot of energy.
When you were doing the broadcast calls for trying to find them easier than just sitting there for 4 hours, which I've done peregrine surveys, so I know how that can be. So how close or how far away do those calls reach when you use that technology?
From Joe's work in Nevada, it was about 1 kilometer, but it really depends on the habitat and so, you know, if you're playing in a cove, then we would just go to the other, you know, around the point and play it again. So we would want it just, basically we want to flood the whole area. And, you know, if we're playing down a long coast, it's a calm day, the waves aren't crashing too loud, you know, it could reach a couple kilometers probably. Sound really carries over the water.
So from what you've said, if I'm not getting an incorrect picture here, once the chicks fledge, then they go out and hunt and pair up really quickly. I mean, it's kind of confusing to me as to figure out if there are bachelor birds out there floating around or if there's some other social system evolving. Could you explain that, please?
So once they fledge, they'll stay around their home territory where their parents are for probably a month or so. And then they head out on their own. They learn to hunt. There's high mortality during the first year, I'd expect, just because they're not capable of hunting sometimes. They don't generally breed until they're 2 years old, although there are records of 1-year-olds breeding. So they're flying around. When they're getting towards breeding age, they will try to find a territory, settle down with a mate. So there are bachelors and bachelorettes flying around out there. Part of the banding hopefully will get at the turnover rate in territories and help us see if perhaps, you know, maybe a female from one territory is displaced by another one, and we find the old female in a different territory. So that's some of the information we're trying to get at. There's not much information on that kind of activity with any of the peregrine populations that I know of.
Is there any pigmentation? Is there any pigmentation during the breeding season changes? Pigmentation in the males or females?
There's no pigmentation changes during the breeding season. Once they get their adult plumage, you can tell the subadults from the adults. The subadults are brownish, and they have vertical streaks on their breast. The adults have a horizontal streak, and their upper chest. Hey, there's a bird. Their upper chest is pretty clear white. So this is the American peregrine falcon. The peals will tend to have, one of the first photos was peals. So they won't have this clear white chest. They'll actually have some black spots up in there. And overall, they're a darker bird. And then the Arctic birds tend to be a lighter color. But basically, the adult plumage is adult plumage. They don't change during the breeding season. No.
Peter, are they monogamous pairs, basically? Do they mate for life?
Essentially, they're
yeah.
yes. If they're unsuccessful at reproducing for a couple of years, there's a likelihood that they'll go and try to find a different mate. And of course, if one dies, they'll find a new mate. And if one is outcompeted, we'll have birds come in and outcompete the territorial male or female and take over that territory.
Do they both sit on the eggs?
They both incubate. The female does most of the incubation and most of the chick care. She won't let the male close to the chicks for the first week or two. So he just goes out and brings birds back to the ledge, and she feeds them.
Aside from your Peregrine Falcon project, what other projects with birds or other animals are you and your organization involved with?
We have quite a few. Right now, we've been doing the bald eagle restoration and monitoring for 35 years now. On San Clemente Island, we are involved in loggerhead shrike recovery. They're an endangered subspecies out there. We study sage sparrows out there. We do island fox work on a lot of the islands. What else? We're doing predator trapping in Camp Pendleton and some other Navy lands for protecting the terns. So we're trapping raptors and shipping them off and hoping they don't return. And trying to develop techniques to keep, for instance, ravens from predating eggs by making fake eggs with very nasty tasting stuff. So they eat these fake eggs, and hopefully it is an aversion to eating the real eggs. A lot of other ones. On our website, we have most of our projects listed at iws.org.
Do they need fresh water, and how do they feed their chicks the fresh water during their first weeks of life?
They get all of their water from their food. So no, they don't need fresh water. If it's available, they'll drink it, but it's not required.
Peter, are you planning to put cameras on these nests to monitor them more successfully?
I would love to put cameras on their nests, but as I mentioned, they tend to move annually. I think if I find a nest that's been used next year for 3 years in a row, then I'll consider trying to put a camera on it. Most of those won't be able to go online, though. There's one in particular on cruise that I might be able to get on, or perhaps the one on Anacapa Island. That could actually go online, I think.
Any more questions?
I'll stick around for a while if you're shy about asking questions in public.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.